The day she bought lunch for the homeless veteran was the day before 200 soldiers marched to her door. Before we begin this incredible story, we'd love to know where in the world you're watching from. Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming tales. The cold was a thief. It crept through the cracks in the window frames of the Morning Glory diner, stealing what little warmth the wheezing radiator could produce. It stole the feeling from Alara's fingertips as she polished the same spot on the worn Formica countertop for the 10th time. Most of all, it stole the customers. Outside, a late autumn snow, thick and wet and premature, was smothering the small town of Havenwood, and the diner sat empty, an island of flickering fluorescent light in a sea of white. Alara's world had shrunk to this counter, this chill, this quiet hum of a refrigerator struggling to keep on. She was the sole inheritor of the diner, a legacy of chipped mugs and faded vinyl booths left by parents she barely remembered. It was also a legacy of debt, a mountain of it with a cruel landlord, Mr. Gable, perched at its summit like a vulture. Every tick of the clock on the wall was a sound she could feel in her bones. Another second closer to the first of the month, another second closer to losing everything. Her reflection in the polished chrome of the napkin dispenser looked back at her. A pale, tired woman of 28 with eyes that held the quiet desperation of a long, losing fight. Hope was a luxury, a meal she hadn't been able to afford for a very long time. Then the bell above the door chimed, a lonely, tinny sound that made her jump. A man stood there, stamping snow from boots that were more whole than leather. He was a silhouette against the swirling white, broad but stooped, his face obscured by a tangle of graying beard and the shadow of a worn-out beanie. He carried the weight of the storm in with him, and something more, a profound weariness that seemed to settle in the air like dust. The few townsfolk who occasionally braved the weather would have seen a vagrant, a problem to be ignored. Alara saw only the cold that clung to him, a cold so deep it seemed to emanate from his very soul. He didn't move toward the counter, just stood by the door, his gaze sweeping over the empty diner as if searching for a memory. His eyes, when they finally met hers, were startlingly clear and steady, a deep, piercing blue that held no plea, only a quiet assessment. It was a gaze that had seen far too much. This was the moment, the hinge upon which her entire life was about to turn. He didn't ask for anything. He simply stood, a silent question in the empty room. Alara's heart, a small, frightened bird in her chest, fluttered with a conflict that was as old as humanity itself. Her mind screamed at her with the voice of Mr. Gable, with the icy logic of the overdue bills pinned to the corkboard in the back. You have nothing. You can't afford this. She had exactly $27 to her name, tucked into an envelope marked rent. It wasn't even a tenth of what she owed. A pathetic offering against a tidal wave of debt. Giving any of it away was not just foolish. It was a form of self-destruction. But her heart whispered something else. It spoke of her mother, who had a rule for the diner. No one leaves hungry. It spoke of the gnawing emptiness in her own stomach, a feeling she knew all too well. She looked at the man's hands, chapped and red from the cold, the knuckles raw. They were strong hands, hands that had worked, that had held things, perhaps even fought for things. They were not the hands of a man who had ever asked for a handout. With a breath that felt like a final surrender to the better part of herself, she moved. She didn't speak, not at first. She simply rounded the counter, took a menu from its holder, and walked to the warmest booth, the one right next to the radiator. She wiped it down with a clean cloth, the gesture deliberate and respectful. "The storm's a bad one," she said, her voice soft but clear in the quiet diner. "Please, sit down. Let me get you something hot." He watched her, his expression unreadable, but he moved to the booth and slid onto the cracked vinyl seat. He didn't open the menu. He just kept his eyes on her, as if he were seeing something far beyond a tired waitress in a failing diner. And in that moment, Alara knew she had made her choice. She would honor her mother's rule. She would give him her last dollars and face the consequences. It was the only thing she had left to give that truly mattered. She poured him a coffee, the steam rising in a fragrant cloud, and placed the thick, warm mug between his trembling hands. "What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice gentle. "The special is shepherd's pie. It's what my mother used to make. It's good for a day like this." He wrapped his hands around the mug, soaking in the warmth as if it were life itself. For a long moment he was silent, his gaze lost in the steam. "Shepherd's pie sounds good," he finally rasped, his voice rough with disuse. "Thank you." Alara went back to the kitchen, her movements practiced and efficient. She took out a portion of the pie she had made that morning, more for herself than in any real hope of selling it, and heated it until it was bubbling. She added a scoop of mashed potatoes and a piece of buttered bread to the plate. It was a simple meal, a poor meal, but it was honest and hot and made with care. When she set it in front of him, he looked at the plate, then back up at her, and for the first time, the hardness in his blue eyes softened. A flicker of something profound and deeply human passed between them. Gratitude, recognition, a shared understanding of hardship. He ate slowly, with a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with his ragged appearance. Alara busied herself at the counter, giving him space, but she watched him from the corner of her eye. He ate every last bite, cleaning the plate with the piece of bread. As he finished, the bell on the door chimed again, this time with a harsh, demanding clang. Mr. Gable stood there, his expensive overcoat dusted with snow, his face a mask of pinched impatience. The warmth in the diner curdled. "Alara," he began, his voice slick with false courtesy that did nothing to hide the steel beneath. "The first is tomorrow. I trust my check will not be delayed again." His eyes flicked to the man in the booth, a sneer twisting his lips. "Running a charity, are we? I hope you're not giving away my profits." Alara's face burned with shame and anger. She felt her spine stiffen. "He's a customer, Mr. Gable." "Is he?" Gable scoffed, walking closer. "Or is he another one of your sob stories? You can't afford to heat this place, but you can afford to feed every stray that wanders in." He tapped a manicured finger on the countertop. "Tomorrow, Alara. Noon. Or the locks get changed. No more extensions. No more stories." He gave the veteran one last look of utter disdain before turning and leaving, the bell clanging violently in his wake. Silence descended once more, heavy and suffocating. Alara stood frozen, the landlord's words echoing in the small space. The $27 in her pocket felt like a pile of useless stones. The man in the booth had finished his meal. He watched her, his gaze intense. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," she whispered, her voice trembling. He pushed his plate aside. "There is no shame in kindness," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Only in cruelty." He reached into a pocket of his worn jacket and pulled out a small, heavy object. He placed it on the counter. It was a coin, dull and bronze, with a strange insignia on it. An eagle with a lightning bolt in its talons. It was clearly old, the edges worn smooth from years of being held. "I have no money to pay you for this meal," he said, "but I want you to have this. It's a marker. It means a debt is owed, and my people always pay their debts." Alara looked from the coin to his face. A marker? His people? The words were strange, cryptic, but spoken with an unwavering certainty that sent a shiver down her spine. "I don't need payment," she insisted, pushing the coin back toward him. "It was a gift." "No," he said, his hand covering hers for a brief second. His skin was rough, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. "You took a risk for a stranger. You showed honor when you had every reason not to. Keep it. It's important." He stood up, his full height seeming to fill the small diner. The stoop in his shoulders was gone, replaced by a ramrod-straight posture she hadn't noticed before. It was the bearing of a soldier. "Kindness is never a wasted investment, young lady. Never." With that, he turned and walked out the door, disappearing back into the swirling snow as silently as he had arrived. Alara was left alone in the cold diner, the landlord's threat hanging over her head, with nothing but an empty plate and a strange, heavy coin that felt like both a promise and a burden. The rest of the day bled into a long, gray evening. No other customers came. The snow fell harder, piling in drifts against the diner's windows, isolating her completely. Alara cleaned the kitchen, shut off the grill, and counted the meager contents of the cash register. Not enough. It was never enough. She held the veteran's coin in her hand, its weight a solid, tangible thing in a world that felt like it was dissolving around her. What did he mean, a marker? Who were his people? It was likely just the rambling of a troubled man, a piece of scrap metal he carried for luck. And yet, the way he'd said it, the conviction in those clear blue eyes, had planted a tiny, irrational seed of hope in the barren soil of her heart. She locked the diner and trudged home through the deep snow to her small apartment above a closed-down laundromat. The cold had followed her here, too. Her landlord for the apartment was the same as the diner's, Mr. Gable. The eviction notice he'd threatened was for both. She sat on her thin mattress, wrapped in every blanket she owned, and stared at the coin. The eagle seemed to stare back, a silent sentinel. She thought about her choices. She could have turned the man away. She could have saved the few dollars the meal cost. It wouldn't have been enough to stop Mr. Gable, not really, but it would have been the sensible thing to do. Instead, she had chosen a moment of warmth, a brief connection with a fellow soul adrift in the storm. She had chosen her mother's memory over her own survival. As she finally drifted into a restless sleep, she didn't know if she had been a fool or a saint. The next morning, she awoke to an unnerving silence. The snow had stopped, blanketing the world in a thick, sound-dampening shroud. The light filtering through her window was pale and gray. It was the first of the month. It was the day she would lose everything. A heavy resignation settled over her. She would go to the diner, pack what little she owned, and wait for Mr. Gable to arrive with the sheriff. There was nothing else to do. As she was pulling on her worn coat, a sound began. It was faint at first, a rhythmic, muffled thudding that seemed to come from far away. She paused, listening. It grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't a machine. It was marching, a deep, resonant thump-thump-thump that vibrated through the floorboards. It was the sound of hundreds of feet, moving in perfect, disciplined unison. Her heart began to pound with a primal fear. Who would be marching in Havenwood? The sound grew into a deafening cadence, stopping directly outside her building. Peeking through the frosted glass of her window, Alara's breath caught in her throat. The street below, pristine and white just moments before, was filled with people. Soldiers, not in modern combat gear, but in crisp dress uniforms, standing in silent, perfect formation. There were dozens of them, then scores, then what looked like hundreds stretching down the block. They stood at parade rest, their faces set and serious, their breath pluming in the frigid air. They were a silent, disciplined army, and they were staring directly at her apartment. At the very front stood the man from the diner. He was transformed. The ragged clothes were gone, replaced by a decorated army service uniform. The tangled beard was neatly trimmed. He stood tall and commanding, his piercing blue eyes fixed on her window. This was not a homeless veteran. This was a leader. Panic seized Alara. She stumbled back from the window, her mind racing. What was happening? Was she in some kind of trouble? Was he angry? A sharp, authoritative knock echoed from her door. Her legs felt like water, but she forced herself to move. She opened the door a crack, her heart hammering against her ribs. The man stood there. Behind him, on the landing, were two other soldiers, standing rigidly at attention. "Ma'am," the man said, his voice the same low rumble, but now imbued with an undeniable authority. "My name is Command Sergeant Major, retired, Frank Miller. May we come in?" Dumbfounded, she could only nod, stepping back to let them enter her sparse, cold apartment. Miller's gaze took in the threadbare blankets and the bare cupboards, his expression softening with a deep, sorrowful understanding. "Yesterday," he began, his voice filling the small room, "I was conducting a personal test. I travel this country, sometimes like you saw me, to see if we've forgotten who we are, to see if honor and decency are still alive. Most of the time, they are not. People see a dirty old man, and they look away. But you didn't look away, Alara. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a coin identical to the one he had given her. This is a Command Sergeant Major's coin. It is given as a mark of supreme excellence and respect. It is not a trifle. The men outside, he gestured to the window, are all members of the 173rd Airborne Brigade Combat Team, active and retired. They are my boys. They are my family. When I told them what you did, that you gave your last bit of food and warmth to a man you thought had nothing, expecting nothing in return, they insisted on coming. They insisted on paying the debt. Tears welled in Alara's eyes, hot and sudden. The debt? It was just a meal. No, Miller said, his voice thick with emotion. It was everything. It was dignity. It was respect. It was hope. That is a debt that can't be repaid with a few dollars. Just then, a commotion erupted from the street below. Mr. Gable had arrived, his face purple with rage as he tried to push through the line of soldiers. What is the meaning of this? This is my property. I want these loiterers removed at once. Two of the soldiers blocked his path, their bodies like granite walls. Miller walked to the window and opened it, leaning out. His voice boomed across the silent street, a commander's voice that brooked no argument. Mr. Gable, this woman, Alara, is now under the protection of the 173rd. We understand you are her landlord. Gable sputtered. I am, and she's being evicted. She hasn't paid. That is being rectified. Miller cut him off. One of my men has already been to the bank. Your mortgages, for both this building and the diner, have been paid. In full, he dropped a thick file out the window, which a soldier caught and handed to the stunned landlord. The properties are now owned by our Veterans Foundation. Your services are no longer required. I suggest you leave. Gable's face went from purple to a pasty white. He stared at the file, then at the sea of grim-faced soldiers, and then he scrambled to his car and sped away. The soldiers on the street broke their formation, but not to leave. A large truck pulled up, and they began unloading tools, lumber, boxes of supplies. What are they doing? Alara whispered, her voice choked with tears. My boys are builders as well as fighters, Miller said, a proud smile finally breaking across his face. Your radiator is broken. Your insulation is shot. The diner's roof leaks. We are here to fix it. All of it. He then handed her a folder. Inside was a deed with her name on it, and a check with so many zeros she couldn't count them. The foundation has purchased the diner from you for 10 times its market value, and we are hiring you back as its manager, with a full salary and benefits, on one condition. Alara looked up at him, unable to process the sheer scale of what was happening. Condition? That once a day, Miller said, his blue eyes twinkling. You make your mother's shepherd's pie. It will be the official meal of the Havenwood Veterans Outreach Center, which will be headquartered right here in your diner over the next few days. Havenwood watched in stunned silence as the Morning Glory diner was transformed. The soldiers worked with relentless efficiency. They repaired the roof, installed new windows, painted the walls, and replaced the cracked vinyl on the booths. They fixed the plumbing in Alara's apartment and insulated the walls until it was a warm, cozy sanctuary. They didn't just fix things. They rebuilt her life from the foundation up. The story spread like wildfire. The town that had ignored her plight now saw her as a hero. People started coming back to the diner, not just for the food, but to be a part of the warmth and community that now radiated from it. Alara was no longer the lonely, desperate waitress. She was the heart of a new, vibrant family. She worked alongside the veterans, laughing, sharing stories, and serving endless plates of shepherd's pie. She had found her purpose not in a building or a business, but in the community she had forged through a single, selfless act. A few months later, Alara stood behind a gleaming new counter, the diner packed with cheerful customers, townsfolk and veterans sitting side by side. The air was filled with the smell of good food and the sound of laughter. Outside, the snow was falling again, but the cold could no longer touch her. Frank Miller sat in his usual booth, nursing a cup of coffee. He caught her eye and raised his mug in a silent salute. Alara smiled back, a genuine, soul-deep smile. She had learned that poverty wasn't just about a lack of money. It was about a lack of connection. And true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the debts of honor you were owed, and the family that arrived to help you pay them. In a world that often felt cold and transactional, she had discovered the profound truth that the most powerful currency of all is, and always will be, simple human kindness. Thank you for joining us for this touching story. If it moved you, please consider sharing it with someone who needs a little hope today. And remember to subscribe for more content that celebrates the best of the human spirit.